Thank you cordially for attending this event. It is an honor and a privilege for me to be here with all of you today. First of all, please permit me to express my profound appreciation to the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, especially to His Excellency Ambassador Emil Briggs, as well as to all the officials of the Embassy of Greece in Vienna, particularly to Drs. Dimitra Faragi and Konstantinos Prokakis, for kindly inviting me to deliver this public lecture, which I fervently hope you will all enjoy. I will do everything in my power to make it as short and sweet as feasible. By the way, I did my research on Austrian do's and don'ts before coming here, and I found out that you have a preference for hard data, but it just so happens that the topic of my study is not suitable for a strictly quantitative analysis, so I will not be showing you any Venn diagrams or pie charts or anything, which is probably for the best for all parties involved, since I'm terrible at graphs. The term political correctness, which will henceforth be referred to as PC to save us a bit of time, because I understand we're a bit pressed for time, has its origins in the United States, where it appeared in 3 different time periods with various connotations. During the 1930s and 40s, it was employed sarcastically by American leftists who denounced rigid adherence to the Communist Party's dogmatism. In the 1960s and 70s, it was again the progressives who brought it back into vogue, only this time in a self-deprecating sense. For instance, a feminist might say something like, "I know it's not politically correct, but I like wearing makeup and trendy clothes." From the early 90s up to now, starting with the so-called culture wars that erupted initially within the academic world, my world, fortunately, PC means imposing restrictions on what is known as cultural appropriation, for example, dressing up as an Indian on Halloween, and on offensive language or even non-verbal signals that might be interpreted as displays of hate or discrimination against certain persons due to their race, age, disability, gender, appearance, religion, or sexual orientation. It also means, however, instituting quota systems in favor of quote-unquote victimized or historically excluded groups with regard to college admissions, or even to how many women, blacks, or LGBT people have speaking roles in a film, a play, or a TV show. Progressives, at least most of them, have transmuted PC into their ideological spearhead, whereas conservatives decry it, even though they sometimes have their own variety of PC. For instance, a recent example being the outrage directed at the black athletes who decided to kneel, to take a knee, that's what the Americans call it, to take a knee during the American national anthem in opposition to Donald Trump and in protest of police brutality against African Americans. In many Western democracies right now, PC currently permeates not just academia, it has speech codes, affirmative action, multicultural curricula, but also virtually all aspects of both the public and the private sphere. International relations, the political arena, social media, art, mainstream journalism, and everyday interactions, be they professional, social, or even sexual. It is my contention that PC is a double-edged sword that paradoxically only cuts one way, the wrong one. Even though PC is often informed by philosophical premises and ethical values with which most judicious and morally well-grounded persons can agree, its practices have gone insane. Or, if I was to employ PC ironically myself, I would say that these practices would most likely have to navigate a plethora of critical, unresolved issues regarding their somewhat dysfunctional relationship with rationality. Even the term PC itself is problematic. A, it is a misnomer, as most PC exponents engage in petty pseudo-political battles, and they are rarely interested in what is logically correct. And B, it constitutes an antinomy, really weird, since it often promotes intrinsically contradictory agendas like positive discrimination. I opine that PC is a self-defeating concept and a no-win situation for both the conservatives and the progressives, but mostly for the latter, given that PC hardly ever accomplishes anything substantive pertaining to the amelioration of the material conditions under which the various downtrodden groups exist, which is what the left is theoretically striving for. More often than not, PC controversies arise from an affectation, a mere affectation, from a holier-than-thou attitude, and they amount to no more than virtue signaling. If you want, after the speech I can explain what virtue signaling entails, or even worse, jejune, juvenile, power trips that masquerade as tackling with vital socio-political issues, while in fact they simply serve as one of two things. One, a crude attempt on behalf of a minority group member to gain cultural significance, to impose her or his views on others, and to abuse whatever amount of power she or he ends up wielding over them, even if only temporarily and in a narrow and meaningless context. And two, a distraction from infinitely more daunting problems that confront humankind as a whole, such as the accelerated pace in which severe economic crises have been unfolding in recent years, the potentially catastrophic impact that fracking has on the environment, the anthropogenic, at least in my opinion, climate change, or the growing sense that our species has crossed the boundary of a figurative event horizon and entered the region of a cultural black hole marked by anti-intellectualism, saturnine cynicism, and ennui. Hence, this speech is not solely about PC, but it also concerns a phenomenon of which PC might be construed as a symptom. That is, an unprecedented ethical and epistemological impasse within a socio-cultural context of wholesale hypocrisy, one in which doublespeak or inanity even can be exalted, sound bites are the order of the day, and the favorite mantra of the zeitgeist's spokespersons is none other than perception is everything. It is all about the optics. I will endeavor to buttress my arguments with illustrative examples, but first allow me to point out the following. My academic interests cover a broad spectrum, ranging from literary criticism to philosophical investigation and philosophical investigations, to the study of cultural prejudices and ethnic stereotypes in the media. Yet all of them revolve around one major underlying theme. And the thing is the multifarious communicational implications and the potentially subversive sociocultural function of wit, what I think you pronounce as wits, what the great poet Novalis called spiritual electricity, the kind of mordant humor, nimble imagination, and lateral thinking, non-reductionist thinking, non-linear thinking, that brings to light the most unexpected affinities between seemingly disparate notions. With all this in mind, I wittingly, and I hope wittily as well, decided to open my forthcoming book with an intentional Spoonerism. For those of you who don't know, William Spooner was an Oxford tutor, known for inadvertently transposing the initial phonemes between two words. So he would say something like, "You've hissed all my mystery lectures," instead of you've missed all my history lectures. Okay, or you've tasted 2 whole worms instead of you've wasted 2 whole terms. Okay, so I use an intentional play on words based on a well-known catchphrase from the TV show Game of Thrones, which I'm sure you've all heard of. A motto that's frequently repeated in the TV series is, "A Lannister always pays his debts." Whereas the title of my introductory chapter is, "A Lannister always dates his pets." Goes out on a date with his dog or cat. Regardless of whether this joke is clever or gay, and I use the latter adjective in its colloquial sense of unsatisfactory or inadequate or lame, it was intended to provoke the more or less rhetorical question: could it be regarded as politically incorrect? And the answer, of course, is a resounding yes, perhaps even raised to the power of 3. 1. I undoubtedly incurred the wrath of animal rights warriors. 2. I perpetrated the microaggressive act of proposing the trigger word gay as one of the ways that my pun might be described. And 3. Even some of the devoted die-hard fans of Game of Thrones could also be affronted by my play on words. Be that as it may, my point is that although I used caustic humor to examine PC, in no way do I make light of the grave problems associated with it. However, I do put forward the hypothesis that an overwhelming proportion of the hypersensitivities of PC can be perceived as part of the ludicrous first world problems, like having a bad hair day, a poor Wi-Fi signal, a closet full of clothes and nothing to wear, or your MP3 player dying on you while you're power walking and listening to your favorite tunes. Time to cite a few pertinent examples. In 2014, I'd rather not name the company, but if you wish, after the talk, I can tell you which one it is. In 2014, a famous, all-powerful, multinational video game company issued a formal apology for not including the possibility for same-sex marriages in the menu of its live simulator game, which is bizarre, given that giant corporations often have immeasurably more serious wrongdoings than this to be sorry for. Nevertheless, they seldom admit it. Several observers, both Democratic and Republican, assert that Trump's victory in 2016 was largely due to a backlash against politically correct absurdities like the one I just mentioned. Likewise, many left-leaning and or black political pundits regard PC and identity politics as a hindrance to promoting progressive policies because it is an oversimplified word. For instance, a female or black or non-binary candidate is not necessarily the best candidate for women, blacks, or transgender people, respectively. With my next example, I feel as if I'm bringing owls to Athens, to borrow a phrase from Aristophanes, or in this case, bringing schnitzel to Vienna. Since you are probably more familiar with this case than I am. In 1988, Philipp Renier, I hope I pronounced it almost correctly, was forced to resign from his position as president of the German parliament after his controversial speech that commemorated the 50th anniversary of the Night of Broken Glass, or Crystal Night as it is also known. He was rebuked for speaking candidly about unpalatable, unappetizing truths from Germany's history. His violation of the politically correct discursive etiquette cost him his career, even though, irrespective of the fact that he was a forthright supporter of Israel and a professed opponent of totalitarianism. This was one of the earliest instances that crystallized, no pun intended, about Crystal Night, that crystallized the ascendancy of the rule of conduct that I referred to at the beginning. It is all about the optics. The truth is not the truth. Okay, what's important is the perception of truth. Renier had said nothing malicious or defamatory. He simply gave a brutally honest account of prevailing attitudes amongst many Germans in the 1930s, but he did so in a manner that many people, or some people, were uncomfortable with, and that cost him his career, irrespective of whether he was a staunch supporter of Israel and an opponent of totalitarianism. Moving on to something more recent. As you may know, the stand-up comedian Kevin Hart had to withdraw from hosting this year's Oscars. I think it was last night, the night before. The reason was that almost a decade ago, he had posted some unseemly tweets about non-binary people, and he had made it emphatically clear that he would react adversely if his son turned out to be a homosexual. The head of an LGBT civil rights group asked Hart to see this as an opportunity to affirm LGBT people. Abiding by the rigidly enforced practices of PC, Hart did apologize to the transgender community, yet he was thought of as being insincere. Now, my question is, how can someone take it for granted that Hart's apology was disingenuous, that it wasn't from the heart, if you don't mind my pun, that it wasn't heartfelt? Okay. Where could we find the apparently pre-established semantic requirements of a politically correct mea culpa? Who amongst the many poor and oppressed people around the world honestly cares about the Academy Awards in general, or about their host in particular? What potential advantage can these people gain from this preposterous controversy? Is Kevin Hart an opinion maker? Even if he is, are such consequential matters as the rights of minority groups better dealt with by opinion leaders or by policy makers? Why is it imperative that Hart affirm the LGBT community? Is the affirmation and the vociferous articulation of gender, racial, or ethnic differences conducive to achieving a cultural symbiosis and a macro-social consensus? Nowadays, many comedy clubs ask performers to sign agreements in advance that they will joke respectfully during their shows, while some hyper-PC colleges rescind invitations to non-PC comedians. And this alone speaks volumes about the cultural ramifications of PC. However, even more telling is the fact that many stand-up comics, Jerry Seinfeld and Bill Maher, for instance, choose not to perform on university campuses, which is the equivalent of a steakhouse owner not serving any steaks 3 or 4 days a week, so as to avoid the moral indignation of vegans. PC does entail socio-political concerns, like how to redress some deep-rooted systemic biases or structural inequalities in order to ensure a level playing field for disenfranchised people, and also how to act, dress, or speak so as not to impugn the dignity of those who belong to minority communities. Yet, it also leads to cultural, ethical, and epistemological aporias, to mention but a few. Does the statement, "it is inappropriate for a non-black person to use the N-word," merely reflect a sentiment or a desire or a belief on the part of whomever utters it, makes it? Or does it correspond to some unassailable verity, either in the sense of an analytic truth or as something that can be empirically verified out there in the world, in the real world? Are strong feelings and fervid convictions about all things PC exempt from passing an acid test that ensures their logical coherence and ethical grounding? Who, and by using what exactly as a benchmark, can decide what is the cutoff point for what legitimately constitutes trauma, disability, harassment, or discrimination? Should the producers of a film, let's say, about a gang of hooligans doing time in an Austrian all-male prison. Desperately try and find a way so